We all know in just phrase God is dead and we kill him. Some became atheists after just hearing these misinterpreted quotes. For me, those type of people are nothing but posers.
Hey, just a minute, you! Them's fighting way!
Hello, everyone. I'm Professor Plank. I respond to various theological and ideological questions and claims from a rationalistic and naturalistic approach in an effort to give and explain the opposite viewpoint and help to balance the conversation. Today, we're going to be taking a look at a video from content creator Lucy Medina, who's going to be explaining to us why she believes that many or most of today's atheists are not real atheists, but are just going along with a trend. Or in other words, just faking it in order to conform to a popular subculture. You know, a subculture that, even today, despite its rising rates in the United States, is only a fraction of the size of the religious majority. A subculture that is still significantly marginalized to the point of outright demonization in many places in the country. And a subgroup that has no identifiable structure or organization, but just exists as a loose assortment of people who happen to share a single answer to a single question. Do you believe in any gods? With the answer being no. And so, if you're looking to be part of a group and fit in with a philosophical collective, atheism certainly won't get you there. But sure, people are just signing up for atheism because they heard a single line claiming that God was dead.
All that I require from each of you is that you fill in the papers I've just given you with 3 little words: God is dead.
So I can't wait to hear how Lucy intends to validate her claims that people are turning away from the largest, most organized, and most incentivized collectives in human history, those being those implemented by organized religion, in order to find purchase with the smallest, most unorganized, and most culturally vilified philosophical position in human history, and apparently only doing so in order to fit in.
Well, that doesn't make sense.
No, not at all.
But before we get to that, if you end up liking what you see in this video and would like to help out the channel, make sure to subscribe and click the bell so you'll always be notified when new content comes out. Check out my social media, including my Patreon, Twitter, and Blue Sky, all linked in the description. And of course, like this video, pop in a comment. All that goes a long way towards pleasing the YouTube algorithm. Unapologetic unbelievers uphold universal understanding, using unbiased utopias. Us atheists undermine unfounded, unproven utterances, unfettered until ultimate unity unfolds, uncovering an unadorned, unvarnished universe, underlining unyielding, unshakable urgency. Us unpious upstarts upends unscientific, unproven undertakings. May I keep my channel motoring along. Now on to today's video.
We all know in just phrase God is dead and we kill him. Some became atheists after just hearing these misinterpreted quotes. For me, those type of people are nothing but posers. Don't get me wrong, it's fine to doubt religion, but today, many will shut it down without knowing what they are shutting down. For that reason, I believe that for many, atheism is just a trend.
Just who is shutting down religion without knowing what it is that they're shutting down? Research has shown that the overwhelming majority of those currently identifying as religiously unaffiliated or atheist, at least in the United States, were raised religious themselves. Pew Research found that only about 12% of the population was raised unreligious. Meanwhile, the adult population of religiously unaffiliated is closer to 30% of the population. And given that about a quarter of that 12% who were raised unaffiliated themselves become religious later in life, that even further skews the number of adults unaffiliated as having been raised religious. The reality is that the overwhelming majority of today's atheists and religiously unaffiliated have lifelong experience with organized religion and made the conscious effort to leave it due to a wide variety of reasons. Not just because they were swayed by a single line about God being dead and that we have killed him. Various reasons for leaving the religion that one was raised under include that they stopped believing in the religion's teachings. Their religion's negative religious teachings about the treatment of gay and lesbian people. That their family was never that religious growing up. That it was bad for their mental health. The clergy sexual abuse scandals, or that their church or congregation became too focused on politics. Nowhere in any data is there any indication that people who reject religion do so because they don't know what religion is, or are just trying to go along with a kitschy line from Friedrich Nietzsche.
A study carried out in the United States last year found that 29% of adults claim to be religiously unaffiliated, and the data just sharpens with Gen Z. Another study in 2022 showed that roughly 49% of young Americans claim to be atheist, agnostic, or have no religion at all. But this radical change in society, going from everyone believing to the half of the adult population not believing, what does it mean? Maybe they had a deep reflection on it, or maybe they're just following what everyone now considers the intelligent thing to do.
There are a number of problems with your claim here, Lucy. First and foremost, your own provided numbers still point to the exact opposite of what you're trying to claim. By the most favorable data, atheism is still a minority position in the United States. Overall, 30% of adults are religiously unaffiliated. And we should also clarify, religiously unaffiliated does not necessarily mean atheist. Now, as an atheist myself, I might like to occasionally lump all of the religious nuns, N-O-N-E-S, into the same camp as self-described atheists and agnostics, if nothing else in an effort to bolster our numbers. And there are plenty of times when it's warranted to do so. But there is a reason that the different categorizations exist. Religiously unaffiliated people can still be theists. They can still affirmatively believe in a god or gods. They just don't identify with any particular organized religion or religious practice. Perhaps they think all religions have it wrong and it's pointless to follow any specific group's conception of God rather than their own. Or they could think all organized religions have been corrupted because they're all made by humans and humans are infinitely corruptible. But for whatever reason, they decide to follow their own unique mode of spirituality. So even under the best of numbers, atheism is a minority classification, and even Gen Z, the cohort with the highest rate of rejection of religion, still only amounts to 48%, meaning that the other 52% are religiously affiliated, and 52 is a higher number than 48. So no matter how you look at the numbers, religion and theism are still the dominant positions in the United States. And so you can't rationally claim that the growth in U.S. atheism is just people jumping on the most popular bandwagon when it is clearly not the most popular bandwagon. And a lot of what we've been talking about up till now is U.S. non-believer rates. We haven't even touched on atheism rates in the rest of the world. What about the atheists in places where being an atheist can literally get you killed? While officially nearly 100% Muslim, a 2020 independent survey by Gaman, Group for Analyzing and Measuring Attitudes in Iran, suggested that only about 40% of Iranians identified as Muslim, with roughly 9% identifying as atheist and another 22% as none or non-religious. And keep in mind, being an atheist in Iran is a death penalty offense. In Saudi Arabia, despite strict laws, a Wynn Gallup International poll previously suggested up to 5% of the population identified as convinced atheists, again a place where being one can get you killed, and so it's logical that more of the population than strictly 5% are atheists. They just can't be open about it. Now, were these atheists just following trends and being posers? Or is convicted rejection of religious belief only valid if one can be murdered for doing so, and everyone else in the rest of the world where it's fine to be atheist are just faking it to fit in? And another wrinkle is that most of the rest of what is called the cultural West, that would be places like Western Europe, Canada, and Australia, have had significantly higher rates of non-belief than the US for, well, basically forever. And it's long been the case that US culturally lags a bit behind the rest of the West, and so rather than the rise in atheism in the US just being a fad or something trendy, the US's declining rates of religiosity could more accurately be thought of as a natural shift away from religion heralded by the rest of the industrialized world, and that the US is finally catching up to.
I think some of the newer non-believers are in that position to be seen as rebellious by not following the convenient or standard thing. In that same way, as an independent individual, they will be seen as someone who has something to say, or as someone beyond ordinary intelligence. If we want to give this an example, I think the new atheism movement in the 2000s could work just fine. Although those who led it were intelligent and had a coherent argument on God's non-existence, most of those who followed it just thought God was dumb, and anyone who believed in him was someone who lacked logical reasoning.
And I base that on absolutely nothing.
Where are you getting that from? Where are you divining the idea that people who reject religion are only doing so out of a desire to be rebellious? I mean, sure, there is a general trend of young people in general to rebel against the teachings of their parents or to lean towards countercultural positions that challenge the traditional orthodoxy. But we aren't talking about getting a crazy haircut or some tattoos while you're away at college because you know your parents are going to hate it. We're talking about deep philosophical questioning, and just because it may happen primarily during a traditionally rebellious age in most people's lives, that doesn't warrant waving away such rebellion as if it were automatically invalid. So often, humans get stuck into traditions and orthodoxy that they go along with due to childhood indoctrination, which itself is not built on a valid or logical premise. And so the kind of youthful rejection of the dogma that they grew up with is usually a good thing. It challenges the status quo and keeps hegemonic traditionalism from becoming stale and outdated. Or at least it attempts to, as many religious traditions have become exactly that. But being rebellious doesn't always result in abandonment of theism. It just means that one is questioning the assumptions that they were brought up with. And if that religious dogma proved itself to be sound, then the rebellious youth will often find their way back to it after a period of rejection or reflection. But when it comes to the most popular of religious beliefs, that being Christianity, 34% of people who grew up Christian will discard their religion by the time they turn 30. And among some older cohorts of Christians, 7% will leave at a later age. So over 40% of Christians eventually leave Christianity. While, as mentioned earlier, only about 25% of those raised with no religion eventually become religious. This isn't showcasing a trend of headstrong teens rejecting the religion of their parents in order to just be contrarian. It's showcasing that religious rejection tends to happen earlier in life as it becomes harder to break religious programming the older you get. And more people gravitate away from religion than gravitate towards it, so that means that each generation is going to have more non-believers than the last, resulting in an ever-growing population of non-believers and religiously unaffiliated. This isn't being trendy. This is just the reality of how psychographic distribution works.
Disobedient and bold acts are always noisier and usually cooler. You probably know Richard Dawkins, but not Miroslav Volf.
I'm a bit confused by the comparison. Richard Dawkins and Miroslav Volf. Dawkins probably needs no introduction, but Volf is a Croatian theologian and is the director of the Yale Center for Faith and Culture at Yale University. Now, yes, I had never heard of Volf before, but I still don't understand this comparison. I mean, Dawkins is a prominent atheist, while Volf is a Christian theologian. It seems you're trying to make the claim that Dawkins is only known because he's an atheist. Meanwhile, theists of similar credentials are completely culturally unknown. Well, I would highly disagree with that. I mean, you really think there are no culturally impactful religious apologists of the same notoriety as Dawkins? What about William Lane Craig, Frank Turek, Ray Comfort, Ken Ham, John Lennox, Cliff Knechtle, Lee Strobel, J. Warner Wallace, Kirk Cameron, Greg Kokel, Sean McDowell, Bishop Robert Barron, just to name a few? I mean, you talk about the New Atheism movement and you showed pictures of the famed Four Horsemen of New Atheism, Dawkins, Dennett, Hitchens, and Sam Harris. Well, okay, who else do you got? I mean, I scattershot 12 prominent religious apologists just now, and I could have given you several more. Point being, let's not act like atheists, particularly atheists advocating for atheism, have the prominent cultural position in our society such that they are capturing the attention of today's youth only because they're so front and center. Meanwhile, the religious proselytizers are relegated to the proverbial back of the bus and never heard from. The vast majority of the theological discourse is still co-opted by the religious. Atheism just tends to have wider appeal due not to its prominence or visibility, but because it resonates with people more despite its minority status in both population and culture.
So, what is an atheist? Basically, and very broadly speaking, it is someone who does not believe in the existence of God or any gods. Which, yeah, that is atheism. But I think we should ask ourselves what the definition means by belief.
Lucy goes on for quite a bit about the definition of atheism, and to my great and unending surprise, she actually gets it pretty much right, describing the differences between positive and negative atheism, and explaining how positive atheists are those who claim a certainty that there is no God, while negative atheists express a lack of belief in any God, but not a convinced or outright rejection of the idea. And she even gives credit to both positions as valid aspects of atheism. Unfortunately, she goes off the rails when she talks about the differences between agnosticism and negative atheism.
What is the distinction between agnosticism and negative atheism? Because they sound right about the same thing. Well, agnosticism is simply not knowing whether there is a God or not, or being sure we cannot know. Even though the latter information seems useless, it matters quite a bit. And that's because atheism in either form isn't only rejecting God, but a whole worldview. Whether fully developed or in process, atheism must address questions regarding morality, meaning, and the nature of reality without relying on a creator. That is harder than it sounds.
No, atheism is not the rejection of an entire worldview. Nor does atheism necessarily have to address morality, meaning, or the nature of reality. This is a fundamental misunderstanding of atheism. See, your problem here is that you're treating atheism as a worldview in and of itself, similar in construction and utility to any theistic worldview. But it's not. Atheism is not a worldview. Sure, Christianity is. It addresses morality, meaning, and the nature of reality. It addresses how humans should act and behave. It has precepts and prohibitions. It has myths of the beginning, predictions about the end, and assertions about all that comes in between. And so does Islam. So does Hinduism. So does every major or minor religion. But that's because those are worldviews. And as such, they need to address those things. But atheism is nothing more and nothing less than one answer to one question. Do you believe in any gods? No. Now, that doesn't even require the complete and total rejection of any and all God-based religious worldviews. Because, for instance, part of the Christian worldview is the belief in souls and an afterlife, and doing good to attain a positive afterlife, while doing bad deeds may yield you a negative afterlife. Well, guess what? You can be an atheist and believe in all of that. Just as long as you don't think that a God has anything to do with souls and an afterlife, it's still in keeping with atheism. Hinduism, for another example, puts forth the notion of karma. It's the idea of universal law of cause and effect. It dictates that every physical, mental, or emotional action, and the intention behind it, creates a corresponding reaction that determines a person's current and future circumstances. And guess what? Atheists can believe in karma. Just as long as they don't think a God has anything to do with it, it's still in keeping with atheism. So atheism can adopt and identify with various aspects of various religious worldviews, just not the God parts. Because, see, atheists have to compile their worldview from multiple other sources. Because everyone does have a worldview, and religious people can get the whole of their worldview from their religion. Atheists cannot and have to assemble their unique worldview from other sources. But atheism is not a worldview, just like off is not a television channel, bald is not a hair color, and an empty plate is not a meal. What does atheism say about morality? Absolutely nothing other than it doesn't come from a God. because we don't believe in any gods. Well, what does atheism have to say about the meaning of life? Absolutely nothing other than it doesn't come from a god, because we don't believe in any gods. Well, what does atheism have to say about the nature of reality? Absolutely nothing other than it doesn't come from a god, because we don't believe in any gods. This really isn't that difficult. The rejection of religious belief is not, in and of itself, a religious belief. I understand the desire to try to turn it into one, because for a theist, that fits atheism into a conception that they can more easily wrap their head around. Hey, it's a worldview just like my religion is a worldview. But you're trying to shove a square peg into a round hole. As much as you started off with a good initial definition of atheism, Lucy, you clearly still don't know what it means.
That's why many people will mistake being a non-believer for being spiritually apathetic. And what is spiritual apathy, you may ask? Basically, someone who doesn't bother or is too afraid to think about religion, morality, or big questions in general. A spiritual apathetic person doesn't believe that there is or isn't a God, but rather someone who just doesn't care.
That would be just another type of atheist. Here, think about it like this. If you were to ask someone, do you believe in any God? If they say yes, then they are a theist. And then you can get into what kind of theists there are, as there's a wide variety of different types of theists they could be. Monotheistic, polytheistic, pantheistic, Christian, Jewish, Hindu, neo-pagan, etc. If, however, they answer anything other than yes, they are an atheist. So if they say, no, I don't believe in any God, they're an atheist. If they say, I don't know whether or not there are any gods, they're still an atheist. If they say, I don't care whether or not there's any gods, still an atheist. Literally any answer other than affirming a belief in God makes someone an atheist. And just like there are different kinds of theists, there are different kinds of atheists. Positive atheists, negative atheists, agnostic atheists, apathetic atheists, anti-theist, mesotheist, Satanist, etc. Theist-atheist is a true dichotomy. Everyone has to be one or the other. And then, within each group, there are many and varied subgroups. But at their most basic, a theist affirms the existence of some god or gods, and an atheist does not. Attempting to take certain types of atheists and shove them into their own separate boxes in order to make atheism more restrictive and thus easier to malign is an old tactic, and it's not going to work.
It is almost normal to send funny videos that ridiculize religion, but when someone comes with a counter-argument, they are dismissed as doing too much or being too deep. This is a problem, because being too deep is sometimes very necessary, especially when talking about something so complex as the existence of a divine being.
What in heaven's name are you talking about?
I gotta say, I've never seen anyone ridiculing religious arguments for doing too much or being too deep. And here's the problem when you use air quotes. It implies that you're directly quoting someone, or in this case, a common quote of something that you see all the time. You're implying that it's standard practice to ridicule people who are making theistic arguments and malign them for doing too much and being too deep. But I have literally never seen this. I mean, my entire channel is about responding to theistic arguments and doing so in great and often painstaking detail. While I may find religious arguments to be fallacious or poorly thought out or sometimes downright silly and deserving of some mockery, I always still counter them and explain my reasoning in great detail. I always take the religious arguments seriously, and most of my atheistic peers in this space do as well. I mean, I don't know what atheistic circles you're talking about, but I have never once, in my entire life, seen any atheist content creators ridiculing apologists and saying that they're doing too much or being too deep. I don't know if you're just referencing a relatively small contingent of online trolls who hang out in apologist comment sections and apply their behavior to the entirety of modern atheism, or if you're actually just making this whole thing up out of whole cloth. But I gotta call bullshit on this. Atheists don't make fun of religious people for advocating their religion. We make fun of religious belief itself, sure, because we find those beliefs to be unsupported and unjustifiable, and we may make fun of the theist for holding to what we view as bad beliefs, but we do not make fun of them for being too deep.
Neither theism nor atheism is cool by itself, but what one could label as cool is arriving with enough knowledge about their beliefs. The point of view doesn't matter, forget about it. Whether it is Christianity, Judaism, Islam, agnosticism, atheism, or any other. The hard part about it is being able to honestly believe in it and knowing why you do so. Not because it was like that since forever, or because it's dumb to think in any other way.
You're continuing to have the same problem as before, Lucy. Atheism is not a belief. There are no beliefs with atheism. Now, other than that, I would agree with what you're positing here, that one should have good and valid reason to hold the beliefs that they do. And that's why this entire video seems misdirected. It seems trivially true that people who are part of any organized religion are usually there because they were born into it and have been told their whole lives that it's dumb to think in any other way. Or they're born into a religious tradition that has been like that since forever. I mean, how many Christians have never even read the Bible and barely know the first thing about what it entails? It seems like this entire thesis about just being a poser because you want to be part of a group and are just buying into something because it's popular without actually knowing about it or understanding it, well, it seems like this whole thing should be aimed at the religious, not the atheists. Not the religiously unaffiliated. See, you say that you need to have good knowledge and reason to hold the beliefs that you do, but atheism has no beliefs as part of it. And probably the most common atheistic claim about religion is that they do not have good or valid reasons to believe the things that they do. So, how are you making a claim that you need to think hard in order to substantiate and validate your beliefs, and then casting aspersions at atheists who have no beliefs that come from atheism that they need to substantiate or validate in the first place? But then you turn a blind eye to religion and the whole host of unsubstantiated and invalid beliefs that they prop up on a daily basis.
This makes no sense. You make no sense.
Many people who proclaim themselves as atheists nowadays are merely following a trend, while not necessarily believing the issue. We should engage, question, and study what we believe and why, never taking a position as the absolute truth.
And this is Lucy's wrap-up on why atheists are just posers. And it largely just reasserts the unsupported assumption she made from the start, that many of today's atheists are just claiming such because they're following a trend. An assertion that she never backed up in the first place, but just a blatant assertion that because atheism seems to be growing, and growing at a faster rate than it used to be growing, then that must mean that it's just a fad, and people coming to atheism now are just rebellious kids who aren't claiming atheism for any good reason. Never mind that there's absolutely no data of any kind indicating wanting to be contrarian, or I want to be rebellious, as even a minor motivation for why people are leaving religion. I mean, if we're gonna speculate on the steep rise of irreligiousness in recent years, there's plenty of other factors that I could throw out there that I think have a more concrete basis for claiming as a reason for religion falling off. Such as the recent rise in Christian nationalism souring the taste of Christianity in the minds of a lot of moderate and more liberal Christians today. Similar effects on liberal Christians from hardline Christian rejection and demonization of trans people and the LGBTQ+ community in general. The growing amount of cases of CSA, not just out of the Catholic Church, but now being found in practically all of the main branches of Christianity in the U.S. The digital age allowing for the more widespread dissemination of secular moral philosophies that allow people to retain their moral center without needing to appeal to the supernatural. What about less cultural scrutiny being placed upon non-believers, meaning that more people who have long been non-believers can now do so openly without as much fear of rejection or social ostracization? I mean, the idea that atheism's rise is just down to it being a fad kind of seems like a desperate attempt by a religious person to castigate the rise in non-belief as something that isn't well thought out, and is just a kitschy cultural reaction, as vapid and shallow as bell-bottom pants or slap bracelets, and something that will fade just as quickly once the shine wears off of it. And here's another thing that kind of irks me. She says that atheistic belief, as if that were a thing, needs to be rationally grounded and well thought out. This is something that comes up quite often that I haven't railed against enough. Why are we atheists expected to have to do in-depth study and know everything about everything in order to make our atheism valid? Seriously, every theist looking to challenge atheists always tends to come with the same stuff. What caused the Big Bang and how is cosmic expansion happening? How exactly does evolution work, including giving me a full and unbroken fossil record detailing every tiny change in species over billions of years? Explain human consciousness, including a complete mapping of every single neural pathway of the brain and how it contributes to the overall formation of what we loosely classify as the mind. Break down the entire human genome and how it developed, including a complete and thorough understanding of not just human DNA, but the DNA of every living thing on the planet today and throughout history in order to chart how they all developed and differentiated over time. And if you can't fully and completely answer all of these and 100 other questions at absolute expert levels, while also being able to boil down those insanely complex answers to easily understandable and quick sound bites, otherwise we'll just insist it's all scientism word salad and gobbledygook and ignore it completely, then you need to accept theism as the default position. Oh, and what are our theistic answers to those challenges? Well, for each and every one of them, God did it, with magic and power beyond our understanding. Done. Theism fully and rationally justified. We atheists are expected to be masters and geniuses of the highest order in order for our non-belief in any gods to be considered a valid position. Meanwhile, any slack-jawed yokel can smack themselves in the face with a Bible or Quran or a Torah until their eyes cross and the drool runs, and they're completely justified in their beliefs. And any claim to the contrary is just ridiculing them and not respecting their faith. Well, sorry not sorry, but that's the absolute bass-ackwards way that things should actually work. It's the believers who need to justify their beliefs with study and evidence and sound reasoning and a full understanding of the magic that they posit. Meanwhile, I and others like me need absolutely no study or answers of our own in order to simply say, I don't believe you. I don't need to know the first thing about cosmology to say that I don't see any reason to conclude that a magical being spoke everything into existence from nothing. I don't need to know the first thing about the diversification of life on this planet to say I don't see any reason to conclude that a boat with 2 of every animal survived a worldwide flood and then incestuously repopulated the world. I don't need to know the first thing about the human genome to say I don't see any reason to conclude that we were formed from a golem spell cast on a pile of dirt. And I don't need to know the first thing about the fabric of reality to say that I see no reason to conclude that an ethereal being with all power who exists outside of time and space made the whole of existence in order to insist that it's very important that one species of hairless ape cuts the skin off the tip of their dicks and doesn't eat meat on Fridays. My non-belief in unsubstantiated religious claims does not need to be justified any further than saying, I don't believe you. It is those religious beliefs themselves that need to be justified. And it seems to me to be proof that it is in fact religion that is the culturally popular position, that theistic belief is regarded as the default position, and that rejecting those beliefs as unjustified makes one a silly, rebellious poser, instead of the critical thinker that they actually are. And so that is where we'll end things for today. So thanks for watching, everyone. Don't forget to like this video, comment, and subscribe so you'll always be notified when a new video comes out. Check me out on Twitter, Blue Sky, and Patreon if you'd like to support my work directly. My Teespring if you want some Plinky merchandise, all that link below in the description. Special shout out to my most recent super thankers here on YouTube, Salvi Mike, Autumnal Fling, and Michael Martin. And with that said, until next time, I'm Professor Plink reminding you to keep striving for greater understanding. It's the best way to get wherever you want to go.